All right. All right. Well, welcome to our Crisis in South Korea webinar. Our purpose today, as many of you know, this is why you're here. South Korea has been in the news a lot in the past couple of weeks. And particularly for those of us in the West who are not tracking with South Korean politics regularly, a lot of news sources were very told the story that, oh, this came out of nowhere. It was unexpected. That's not necessarily the case, but at least for those of us in the West, that was the perception of it. But the stories of democratic turmoil, president enacting martial law and the legislature immediately overturning it, impeachment proceedings. Um, there's a lot of questions about what is going on. And again, for those in the West, what does it have to do with us? And if you're in Korea or have family in Korea, then there's an even deeper conversation on how does it impact you and what's going on for you. So to help us understand that, we're going to be speaking with Peace Catalyst, peacebuilder Jenny, and one of her local partners, Father Peter Gong. Now, this just a little bit about Peace Catalyst. Peace Catalyst is hosting this webinar. Oh, where'd that go? Okay. There we go. Took me a sec to get there. If you are unfamiliar with Peace Catalyst is an international network of Christian peace builders. Essentially, we're a bunch of Christians who care about peace, and we're dreaming of a world where the church is better known for building peace than it is for breaking it. As an organization, we focus on mobilizing Christians and our neighbors to collaborate for peace across lines of difference, working with people who are different than us, people we're in conflict with two primary directions. We focus on equipping people with the skills and theology of peace, so they understand that it's part of their faith and their tools for doing it well. And we're focused on empowering local peace builders to catalyze change. We have peace builders who are scattered in communities all over the world who are doing the hands-on work and getting their neighbors to do it with them. If you want to get more involved in Peace Catalyst, which we always love to see people plug in, we are always looking for people to donate. And our peace builders are supported entirely by donations. And likewise, as an organization, we're trying to think about how do we do mobilizing work. We are regularly offering webinars and workshops like this, and both in-person and virtual peace building trainings, community organizing, conflict transformation, stuff like that. We do Christian peace building small groups if that's something you want to dive into. We do peace pilgrimages to places of conflict. At the moment, we have ones that occasionally run to Bosnia and Herzegovina. We're preparing one for Israel and Palestine next year. So if you want to get able to visit places of conflict and learn about peace, we would love to take you. And as a network of peace builders, we're always excited to see people join us. You can volunteer in your own local community, be a peace ambassador with us. You can join us to help mobilize the church and run small groups and webinars and workshops if you would like to learn how to do that. And we're also always welcoming full and part-time staff who want our support in raising money and want to be able to dive into this with a lot more of the time. So, brief summary, learn more, peacecatalyst.org. You'll get a follow-up email from us about this as well. Yeah. Our conversation today is with Jenny, who is with Peace Catalyst in South Korea. She's a program director there. Jenny is going to introduce herself and Father Peter in a little bit, but also with us is Father Peter Gong, Catholic priest, the Diocese of, well, my Kring's awful. I'm actually not going to try to pronounce that. I'm going to let them. Yeah, off of that, I'm actually going to go ahead and pass it to Jenny and do deeper introductions, and then we'll go from there.
All right, thank you, Peter.
Do you want me to turn the slides off for this part, Jenny, or should I just
It's
keep it up?
okay. You
Okay.
can, yeah, you can keep it up.
Okay.
Yeah, I will go ahead and say Lee It's not the easiest. I'm not even sure if I pronounce it correctly half the time, but that's where Father Peter is working, and I'm really grateful that he was willing to join today. He is the director of the Catholic Institute for Northeast Asia Peace, in addition to being the secretary of the Committee for Reconciliation of the Korean People. That lies under the Catholic Bishops' Conference here in Korea. So he does a lot of work related to trying to repair the relationship between the North and the South here in the peninsula and doing that work in the church. So I have been so honored to be able to work with him over the past several years. If you can skip ahead a couple slides, we'll just jump into the presentation and take it from there. So on Tuesday, December 3rd, at 11 p.m. at night, there was a sudden announcement that came on the television here in South Korea. I happened to be sleeping at that time. I went to bed at 10:30 that night, and so I missed all of the excitement. But a lot of my Korean friends couldn't sleep all night because they got this announcement that the president was ordering martial law. This man has been facing intense political opposition. And really, we're kind of in a political deadlock here ever since the April elections, where the opposition party got elected into the legislature. He's been trying to push things, policies that they don't agree with. They've been trying to investigate his wife and do other policies that he doesn't agree with. So he's vetoed bills 25 times in a row. All of this context is playing out here in Korea. So it's things that people know. But I don't know that very many people actually expected that he would institute martial law. So when that happened, it was very shocking. We'll go to the next slide. In addition to calling out anti-state forces, President Yoon Suk-yeol also stated that this law was in order to defend the Free Republic of Korea, that's South Korea's official name, from the threats of North Korean communist forces and to eradicate the shameless pro-North anti-state forces that are depriving our people of their freedom and happiness. Now that's a mouthful. But as I learned back in college, English Writing 101, an assignment on propaganda, take note when politicians are using language that's very vague or flowery enough to give different meanings to different people. Note the feeling that the politician is trying to create. Next slide. For Koreans, the one but right before that. For Koreans, this justification sounded antiquated and it brought up memories of past military dictatorships, which is really scary. Yoon's political opposition, as well as his party members and some of his own cabinet members, were shocked when they saw this news. So shocked, in fact, that some were wondering if this was an AI deepfake. One of the leaders of the opposition party went live on his social media as his wife was driving him straight to work to call all the members of parliament to rush to South Korea's National Assembly immediately to vote to overturn martial law. And of course, many citizens accompanied it as well. Next slide, please. People looking on from overseas were wondering, who are these anti-state forces? And the next slide. Or is there really some imminent threat from North Korea? Next slide. So although some politicians and scholars had already predicted that Yoon might try martial law during his presidency, every South Korean person I talked to about this was shaken and deeply worried when this happened, and also greatly relieved when it was able to be overturned. Next slide. Yoon ordered special forces to go and stop any political activity that was happening at the National Assembly, because according to his martial law, no political activity was allowed. The soldiers faced staunch resistance from both lawmakers and civilians, but the soldiers showed restraint, and they stopped short of the president's instructions to drag politicians out of the chamber while they were voting. So the martial law was able to be voted down within hours, and by morning, the president had rescinded it. Next slide. Civil society organized quickly in response, releasing statements condemning this illegal use of martial law. Across Korea, the streets filled up with people who were calling on Yoon to resign or to be impeached. And that statements like that included one from the Catholic Church, one from the National Council of Churches here. So the church was very vocally speaking out and saying, no, you cannot, this is an inappropriate use of your power. We won't stand for it. You need to be held accountable. Next slide. Next, yeah, there we go. So to understand why people responded so quickly, we need some more historical context. Then I'll explain where we're at now and what might come next. And I'll also share why American solidarity with Korean people is very important at this time. Then Father Peter Kang, the director of the Catholic Institute for Northeast Asia Peace, will share some remarks, and then we'll have some time to consider your questions and discuss together. Peter, if it's giving you trouble, rather than clicking, just push the forward button. I linked all my sources to the photos, so that's
So,
the
sometimes that works with different screens, sometimes not.
yeah.
Trying to get hang on.
제니, 그럼 제가 얘기할까요?
Just a minute.
Yeah.
I have a little bit more to share about the historical context, which I'll go ahead and share, and then if the slides come back, they come back.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Peter. The next slide. South Korea has a long modern history of martial law and military leaders. This began from the Japanese Imperial Army time when they oppressed the Korean people. And then we have had US-backed South Korean presidents who have ordered martial law over and over again. Next slide. Rather than gaining their liberation from forced self-rule in 1945 when the Japanese colonial period ended, North and South Korea were cut into two and occupied by the Soviet troops in the north until 1948 and by the American troops in the south, and that continues to this day. The United States troops are still here. Next slide. The first president of the Republic of Korea was a Korean-born, American-educated man that came back to Korea on a US aircraft carrier when there was independence from Japan. The US military backed his presidency even when he ordered martial law to purge his ideological enemies, the commies, the Reds, the anti-state forces. There were an estimated 100,000 Korean people who were killed because of politics in the years leading up to the Korean War, and family members or those who spoke out about the violence were at risk of being accused as being communists too, which was called red baiting. The next slide. Labels like anti-state, Reds, communists, or any association with North Korea, these were slurs that could easily be weaponized. These words triggered all the trauma from the unended Korean War. So they were used by president after president to target political enemies here in South Korea. I've put on that slide several things that are important to understand, which I won't get too deep into the details, but just understand that this red baiting has been used and it's been used to kill people. So we'll go ahead to this next slide. Martial law has continued in South Korea's history with military coup after military coup, and assassination appointed leaders time and time again. Presidents would mobilize the military against their own people, often targeting protesters, democracy activists, or their political opponents. And time again, they would call them anti-state forces, communists, Reds. Next slide. In the middle of that chaos, South Korean young people led a democracy movement in the 1980s, calling for direct elections. Next slide. Korean people were tired of military coups and their corrupt electoral college, because the electoral college that would appoint the president would then turn around and appoint the members of the electoral college. So it had lost all legitimacy in the people's eyes. Next slide. The mass protests won in 1987, and South Korea's political landscape was transformed with direct elections and peaceful transfers of power. Next slide. The Constitution was also amended that year to include human rights and to provide checks and balances against the power of the president, which you've seen at work in the wake of this 2024 martial law order. This was a people's victory, and I think the people have enjoyed the hard-won democracy that's come to South Korea. Next slide. The one just before that. So now let's connect that historic context to what's happening today. If you see this picture here, you might be mistaken to believe that this was the protest that happened after martial law. And it's true that there were hundreds of thousands of people filling cities all around Korea, protesting and calling for this man to step down or to be impeached. However, this actually is from November 30th. There were about 100,000 people that were protesting this president the weekend before he called martial law. So, like I said already, he was an embattled president. He had only a 17% favorability rating, and he had a lot of policies that the people weren't accepting. But he was being backed up and doing a lot of things that supported the US interests, not the people's interests. Next slide. So Yoon Suk-yeol is a former prosecutor. He's also a first-time politician. Some say that he ran more on his personality than on his policy, but he was elected by a very narrow margin in 2022. Many of his political actions have stirred up controversy. Those include recent things like wanting to send weapons to Ukraine. South Korea hasn't wanted to get into this conflict, the South Korean people, and they haven't wanted to strain their relationship with Russia. It's a lot of things that are playing in here. There have been other things too, like strengthening the military alliance with Japan. Now, Japan was the colonial power over Korea, so there's a lot of history there, and a lot of it hasn't been atoned for in the ways that South Koreans would like to see, including like Japan's just not teaching about this history in their history books. So to see that Yoon wanted to make a military alliance with the United States and Japan, a lot of South Koreans got angry. He also glossed over some of the war crimes that Japan had committed and tried to tell the South Korean people just move on. So there were a lot of things here that were controversial. Like I said earlier, he lost the midterm election in April. All of the legislature, now the majority of the legislature are his opposition party. So he's not able to get his policies pushed through like he was able to before the April elections. So anyone who's not going to play by his rules is going to be called an anti-state force. Unfortunately, he hasn't learned the art of negotiation and working with others to resolve problems because, like we said, he's a prosecutor, and that's what he knows. He's also been shielding his wife from corruption investigations, which has got the Korean people angry. Go ahead to the next slide. There were 6 mandates in this martial law order, which included curtailing all political activity, silencing political opposition, restricting free speech, revoking the right to assemble peaceably. And then number 5 and 6 were really forcing some things that he was stuck on. Like he'd also made some policies related to quotas for medical students. Those were some domestic policy issues that people weren't agreeing with. There were a lot of doctors and medical professionals who have been striking. And so he wanted to order them all back to work rather than allow them to collectively bargain for what they need to achieve. And number 6, he promised innocent, ordinary citizens, people who are going to keep their head down and stay quiet, that he'd do everything to make sure that this military law wouldn't be too inconvenient for them. Next slide. There have been a string of resignations since martial law got overturned. And here are 3 people I'd just like to highlight who have resigned, and these are his high school buddies. This is part of the reason that some people anticipated that he might try to use martial law, because back in September, he appointed General Kim Yong-hyun to the National Defense Minister position. This is his high school friend, so they've got a very tight relationship. And this man has apparently been calling for a lot of things that are really inflammatory and could have put us back in the middle of an active war here. So the Korean War has not ended. Military rights to use force are not off the table. But for the most part, besides testing weapons, both countries tend to show restraint in attacking each other. It happens quite rarely. But this general had sent drones flying over Pyongyang to try to provoke them. And some are believing that this is because he wanted to get them to attack, to give a common enemy to the president, so that so that people would rally behind the president. Maybe then he could put in martial law. The week before martial law was put into place, he had ordered a missile strike against the North, but the Joint Chiefs of Staff blocked it mercifully. These things started to emerge in the investigation after the resignation of these individuals, after the martial law was overturned. So we're still uncovering how deep this rabbit hole went, how close we were to all-out conflict on this Korean peninsula. I have heard stories, which maybe some of the folks on the call can corroborate for me or tell me it's just not accurate. I haven't been able to find the source, but I've heard stories that these intelligence officers were also planning secret ops where they would even dress South Korean soldiers in North Korean military uniforms and attack American soldiers to try to provoke an all-out war, which would give everybody a common enemy and a reason to impose martial law to maintain control over his political enemies here at home. So yeah, it's a vast overreach of power, and the people are really mad. So last Saturday, the president was impeached in the National Assembly. That could only happen if members of his party also voted for his impeachment. They did, and so he's been impeached. However, he doesn't have any power that he can exercise right now, but the prime minister is filling his role, but he still has to have this impeachment accepted by the Constitutional Court. So go ahead, 2 slides. He will be appearing before the Constitutional Court on December 27th. But why does this matter to Americans, and how could Americans play some active role of solidarity? Does it have anything to do with us? I think it really does, and that's what I hope I can explain here. The United States plays a very important role in South Korea because we've got troops here on the ground. We even have operational control of South Korea's military during wartime. We have a lot of authority here inside of Korea. And this president has given the United States military, the United States State Department, a lot of things. The United States kept pressuring South Korea to get involved in the war in Ukraine. The United States is often trying to use South Korea to achieve some kind of military alliance here to face off with China, which isn't actually in South Korea's interest. So in many cases, the United States is pressuring South Korea to do things that are against the interests of its own people. This president was willing to go along with that. If this president is impeached and another president is elected from the opposition party, the United States might lose some leverage here. Maybe not much, but maybe significant leverage in achieving what they want. And so this could be concerning for the American establishment. And this is where I think we as Americans have a voice. I think we should be contacting our elected officials and asking them to please support the democratic process inside of South Korea and to let it run its course and to not interfere in any negative way, but to actually be a voice for the people and the people's interests here in South Korea. The United States has been, we'll go ahead to the next slide. This was last year at Camp David when President Yoon Suk-yeol and Biden and the Prime Minister of Japan met together. They have formed a trilateral military partnership, which is very much in the United States' interest with facing off with China. The Trump administration, incoming as well, is really concerned and wants to put more military assets over in this part of the world rather than other places. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk just briefly about the differences in the interests here. This trilateral partnership that's been formed between the different nations and their militaries is formed for different reasons, right? The United States believes that these partnerships are key. The United States is trying to get Japan and South Korea together militarily for a long time, and they believe it's key to maintaining our hegemony, essentially, in the world is to have a strong military alliance with our allies, which we don't always treat like equal partners. We really want to deter the DPRK, is the United States government's interest, deter North Korea, and also to face off with China, describing it as a mounting challenge and our pacing challenge. Now, South Korea doesn't have any interest with facing off with China. Actually, in South Korea's strategy document, they talk about China as an ally, as a key partner for peace and prosperity. So although President Yoon here, who's just gotten impeached, although he's really jumped into this military partnership with the US and has been going along with US interests, another president might not do that in the same way. So this is why I think as Americans, we should speak to our government and ask them to support this process that's playing out here in South Korea democratically. Let's work for the interests of the South Korean people, not the interests that only serve our nation. I think it's in the interest of peace. So that's what I had to share today. And now we'll go to Father Peter Kang for his comments.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I really appreciate all the support for democracy in Korea and for peace on the Korean Peninsula. I also want to give a big thank you to Jenny for preparing today's presentation. She has been such an important part of our work at the Institute, and I'm truly grateful for everything she has done. As Jenny mentioned, President Yoon declared a state of emergency, something that most Koreans never imagined would happen. In his speech, he mentioned the communist forces of North Korea and said it was necessary to protect the Free Republic of Korea from them. In the past, military dictators in South Korea used the tension between North and South Korea to stay in power, control politics, and silence the people. We thought the time of military dictatorship was over and that South Korea's democracy was getting stronger. But as you see, as the situation on the Korean Peninsula becomes more dangerous, South Korea's democracy could face serious limits. There are also reports that President Yoon and his close associates tried to start a conflict with North Korea while preparing for the state of emergency. This is shocking news, but since similar things have happened in the past, many Koreans believe it could be true. The Korean War is still not officially over. As we've seen in other countries still at war, conflict always hurts basic freedoms and human rights. This is also true for North Korea, I think. If we want real change and better human rights there, we need to officially end the Korean War and make a peace agreement. To help bring change in North Korea, we must first change things in ourselves. Once again, I want to thank you for supporting South Korea's democracy and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Please continue to pray and stay focused on this issue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father Peter, and thank you, Jenny. All right, we have a little bit of time left. Gonna go ahead and maybe re-spotlight Father Peter and Jenny, get back up. And yeah, I'd love to know what questions you have. What are you wondering? What are you thinking? Any responses? I'd say you are welcome to type in the chat and I can read it out, or I'd love it if you would raise your hand, either in real life or virtually, and I'll invite you to share.
May I ask a question of the Koreans who are here in the room?
Please do.
When you think about what's going on now, what would you like to tell Americans about this situation? What would be important for them to understand?
Well, if I may, let me comment on how I perceive the US presence in this country and also overall in this region in Northeast Asia. This is not directly related to the martial law declaration happening, but it's more related to the overall context where it happened. So this is the photo that I took last year. If you take a look at the t-shirt I'm wearing carefully, you will see two figures here. One is Donald Trump, of course, and the other is Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader. This photo was taken right at the hotel where they two met, actually, for the summit. And it was a disaster for Kim Jong-un. He was very hopeful that he could bring back something tangible back home, but he went home. He had to go home empty-handed, made him furious. And this summit actually was the moment I realized something very significant running deeply behind what's happening in South Korea. Why these two people are having the summit without the South Korean president? Why is the fate of South Korea decided by somebody who is not our leader? That's the reality. That it really shocked me, actually, visibly at that moment, that we are not the owner of our fate in this country. South Korea, number 10 economy in the world, now with high level of democracy and everything, but still, the US is deciding what we are going to do in this country. And shockingly, when this whole fiasco happened, US knew exactly what was going on. They were tapping the conversation inside the presidential office. I was very, very shocked they could do that. They knew from the beginning what was going to happen, and they knew the whole scenario. That's how strong the influence of US in this country. So the politicians here are not really happy to talk about this strong presence of the US power inside this country. So one of the messages I'd like to share with you, the American audience here today, is to plead with you that US is actually an East Asian country as we perceive it. The strong presence here is running behind the scene all the time, and the US foreign policy is affecting our daily life here too. And this ongoing animosity between North and South is actually putting the people here into misery, and it's the perpetual background behind this political tension as well. We need to end the war, like Jenny already mentioned. I deeply appreciate the effort of your organization, Korea Peace Advocacy, and everything. So I hope that US Christians will be able to understand the interplay of US presence within this region so that the public opinion can be more conscientious about the US foreign policy to affect and influence the future policies. Thank you.
Wow, Jung-ho, thank you. That's a harsh reality to see the destiny of your nation being negotiated by the leaders of two other nations. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have questions or comments, particularly that you'd like to share with American Christians? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I see that Kaya's here. Kaya, if you're willing to share, I would love to hear a little bit about. Kaya is also an American. She's living on the island of Jeju, on the south of South Korea, and there's quite a U.S. military presence there. So I'd welcome Kaya to share anything if she would like to.
Sure. I first I have a comment that I just never got to share. That was actually at least 30,000 people who were massacred in Jeju, 1948 and following years. But with that history, especially here in Jeju, the memories of war and how undemocratic the oppressive martial law has been, and not even letting people here speak out about the massacres of tens of thousands of their friends and family until there was democracy. And even then, just slow, gradual freedom for people to express what happened in the past. In the years of democracy, they could finally talk about these massacres that happened in the early days of Korea's independence. So now here in Jeju, as US ships who were first present around Jeju during the time of the massacres, the years following 1948, those same US ships coming and doing international war practices and treating Jeju Island like their own resort for taking their vacation time here and replenishing supplies in their ships. It still feels like there's this threat of war with the ongoing military preparations that we see around us. And so partly because that's an issue that I'm already paying attention to, but I think it's true for people anywhere in Korea that just hearing the words martial law made me think, and I imagine many people think, war broke out with North Korea. Like martial law, to me, I couldn't imagine any other scenario other than war with North Korea. So that was very scary. Before going to bed, I did see the news and was somewhat relieved to see that war had not broken out yet. But that threat of war was definitely a big fear associated with the martial law declaration. And I have been very much impressed with the fast reaction of Korean civil society to oppose martial law and people getting out in the streets. And when the vote for impeachment happened last Saturday, I was with Korean friends on the streets, and people were just dancing with joy. And it was the most joyful celebration to at least have some sense that there's responsiveness from the legislature, at least, to the people's wishes to preserve democracy. And so Beth, who's on this call, was there as well, and it was just a very inspiring experience to be together with the Korean people as they celebrated the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol. And I know it's a long journey ahead, but I hope that people will keep paying attention to what's happening in Korea, even as it gets more of a complicated political situation from here on out. But thank you to Jenny and Father Peter Kang for preparing to share this story with people today.
Thank you, Kaya, for your good work protesting the American military base on the daily there in Jeju. Father Peter, I know you have your PhD in North Korean studies. Have you watched how North Korea is responding to this situation? And if this impeachment is able to proceed, if the Constitutional Court accepts this impeachment and there's an election, do you see any opportunities reopening for engagement with North Korea?
So I'm not sure about that. As you see, the North Korean leaders about a year ago, he make official announcement he will not have any engagement with South and with something. So, but we will see. I hope that we eventually we hope another chance to have talk with them and with US. We will see. Yeah. But I think it's very important for us. This is a new chance. We change many things. Almost everything about North Korea, I think, because before a North Korean leader mentioned about regardless of is a progressive party of South Korea or conservative party, both parties tried to overturn the Korean regime in his perception. So if we want to talk with North Korea again and make an engagement, I think we change many things toward them. And especially, I think the role of Christians is very important because for Christians, both for South Koreans and for Americans, I think if we have interest in North Korea, we think that it's kind of our mission to them about evangelization, baptize them, something. But that's why if the North Korean government restrict the kind of mission, we could demonize them. So which we cannot talk with them. So I think it's very important for all of the Christians. We change many things about North Korea, I think. Thank you.
You opened up a really important point, which I don't know that we can fully cover in the next 9 minutes, but you mentioned many Christians have an attitude that if there can't be evangelization in North Korea, that we should just demonize them. What are the alternatives? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? I have lots of thoughts, but I'd love to hear from others.
Well, one of the key factors behind this kind of ongoing demonization between these two governments, regimes, is politics, actually. Politicians use this ideological divide to justify their policies and other kind of their political agenda. So we believe politicians actually need to have new understanding, new perspective, how they can promote peace and reconciliation between these two regimes. North Korea is very reluctant to open their doors to South Korea because of their ongoing perpetual control over their people. They need to be blindfolded to the reality of outside. That is one major stumbling block. But among the South Korean politicians, they still use this labeling, I would say, stigmatizing people with the fear of communism. I'm not sure how this still works, but labeling someone as a North Korean sympathizer, communist, it still works. That's how the political tension is creating more divide between these two countries. So I believe Christian politicians, to begin with, need to have different understanding and approach to bring these two regimes together closer. And also, U.S. Is also behind this. So I hope that the next president from the United States will somehow bring these two countries closer.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You said something there about the U.S. You talked about the U.S. role, Jung-ho, and then you also seem to just describe the United States as an obstacle to the end of the Korean War, if I heard you correctly. That's something that I've noticed many Americans don't think about. I've noticed many Americans aren't even necessarily aware that 74 years later, after the Korean War began, it still has not ended. So of course, North Korea, South Korea are going to have, like Father Peter mentioned earlier, strict laws to try to keep their people safe in a wartime, in an environment where there could be espionage and other concerns to be aware of, real security concerns. But how is the United States an obstacle to peace in Korea? I think of Jungho's t-shirt and that picture of the North Korean leader and Donald Trump negotiating together for a peace agreement or whatever that ended up being nothing, as a huge disappointment to the Korean Peninsula. But they were the ones negotiating because South Korea was cut out and the United States became the middleman. So the United States plays the role of middleman a lot here on the Korean Peninsula. The United States oversees the armistice agreement here on the Korean Peninsula. So the United States can say when engagement can or can't happen across that border. If the United States was a signatory a signature to the armistice agreement. So if a peace agreement will be signed, the United States has to be part of that. But there's not really the political will in the United States to care much about what's happening in Korea. And that's where I hope the more we learn and understand the Korean experience of this, we will say, okay, let's raise our voice for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And we as the United States can step out of that middleman role and let North and South Korea relate to one another as they would like to relate as sovereign nations. In our final few minutes, American friends who are on the call, as you were hearing about what's been going on in South Korea, was there anything that struck you or anything that you could relate to? I'd love to hear your thoughts. As an American, I can say that I was thrilled to see the democratic process working here. Go ahead, Quanta. You can unmute.
Thank you. I attended the peace conference last year in Washington, D.C., the Korean Peace Conference with Christine Aung, and she's the Korean women who went to DMZ, and they're also working on having a peace agreement between the two nations, and then they're saying that the U.S. is hindering that process. So I think as an American, I feel that it is our duty. We went to see our, actually the senators and some Congress people, for that effort. I think it was Barbara Lee who was one of the speakers. It was very hot, actually. It was in July. And so I became more involved and then I understood what is going on. And so what is it that we can do, considering that we have a different president coming in who seemed to be more, who appears to be anyway, more amicable with the process of maybe talking to the North Korean leader, but I don't know how sincere and honest that is. I don't know. So what can we do as citizens of the United States to help the process of making peace?
Thanks for your question, Quanta. And I remember seeing you in Washington, D.C. It was great to be there together.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I think one thing that we can continually do as we are members of a democracy, which welcomes our voice, is we can try to build dialogue with our representatives. One way that I do that is every year, the Korea Peace Now grassroots network mobilizes Advocacy Week, and we schedule meetings with our congressional representatives, and we sit with them and we tell them, this is why peace in the Korea matters to me. This is why the United States needs to play an active role. And here is a bill that's proposed in the House and in the Senate that you can sign on to, and you can support peace in Korea. So we give them an actionable item, but then we express why it's important. Because these decisions aren't going to be made by us. We don't get to sign a peace agreement, but our governments can. We can continually ask Donald Trump. Last time when he was inaugurated, I was writing out handwritten letters and mailing them to the White House, asking President Trump to negotiate for peace. Now, you say something very important. It's how sincere would he be in those talks? We don't know, but with these sudden changes on the peninsula, with the sudden changes, if this current leader, if his impeachment goes through and South Korea elects a leader that's more open to engagement with North Korea, and if Donald Trump is somehow a wild card, who knows what could happen. But we can continually raise our voices for peace. So I've dropped into the chat several links The first one is just a post that I made on my blog about solidarity with South Koreans. If you scroll to the bottom of that post, there's several actionable steps you can take, including ways to contact your senators and representatives to ask them to support the democratic process here in South Korea. Second, there is a letter that we can all sign asking, again, our representatives in the House and the Senate to support peace on the Korean Peninsula. There's a bill called the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act. It will be reintroduced again in the new legislative session next year. And finally, if you want to actively play a role and keep learning, come join me for Korea Peace Study Group once a month. Drop me an email. Drop my email in there too. And join our grassroots network. We would love to have you. We'd love to keep
I
learning.
remember you now. We have a picture together, actually.
We did.
Yeah, you're in the picture. I put it on my Facebook. Let me see. I'm putting my email here.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to pass it back to Peter because we're past the top of the hour. So thank you all for being here.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Father Peter, and thank you to everyone else. It's been a lovely and insightful conversation. I've learned quite a bit. Yeah, I think that is an hour. So I'm happy to bless you and send you into the rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And yeah, Jenny's email's in the chat. Feel free to reach out if you have more questions, and we'd love to stay in touch. Thank you all.
Night. Merry Christmas.